This is your spiritual connection, ourplanetlife.org, broadcasting from Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. Good morning. Welcome to DFW Business Hour this morning. This morning we have Mike Meierhofer this morning, and we'll go to studio. My name's Art Garcia, and I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. Hello to everybody on the chat line. We do ask you if you have any comments, be sure to put them down there. We'll be more than happy to answer them. But we'll go to Studio 2 to introduce our brother, Henry Roncancio.
Good morning, Art. Thank you for helping us. It was great of you to stay here and help us a little bit. And we are very excited to have Mike with us today.
Yeah, now we'll go directly to Skype and introduce Mike Meierhofer. Mike, good morning.
Good morning.
How's it going?
Very good. I'm doing fine.
Great. What is the topic going to be about today?
I'm going to talk a little bit about the Christian in the workplace and how the Bible and prayer can, biblical principles and prayer can affect us in a positive way in the workplace.
Well, Mike, that sounds terrific. Very interesting topic. Let me ask you, what makes you excited about this topic? Let me tell the audience first that I had the privilege to meet Mike about, maybe 10 years ago, Mike?
Yeah, probably.
Probably. I don't want to say more because then people will get the wrong impression about, well, they are seeing me, so no problem, Mike.
Yeah, they'll know how old we are.
They know. Yeah, but, Mike, I admire him. I appreciate him. He travels a lot. He's very involved in the mission work, art. He goes to Cambodia very, very frequently, right, Mike?
Yes, I'm heading over there again in about 3 weeks.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you have a very solid experience as a Christian, as a traveler, as a businessman. I understand that you had your business at some point too. So that's why I think that this topic is going to be very, very interesting. What makes you particularly excited about this idea of applying the biblical principles in the working place?
It's just I can see the change that it creates in people's lives, the effect that it can have on them. And because, as a Christian, I was not a Christian when I was in business, and then I was converted to Christ, and then stayed in business for another year, a little over a year, before I was just obsessing over becoming a preacher for the Lord. And but just to see the difference that it makes when your life is guided by biblical principles in every area. But a lot of times we think, well, in business that's a whole different deal, and so it really doesn't apply. Business is business. That's not really true. The biblical principles can be a great blessing to people who are either employees, employers, own their own businesses, managers, whatever.
So you're telling us, Mike, that you have had both experiences. You have been out there without the guidance and the principles of the Bible, and now you are here and you see the difference that the Bible makes in your life.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. When I say I was out in the world, I was out in the world. And, I come from a pretty rough background from my earlier days, and in business, I always tried to be honest and be a good businessman. But adding biblical principles, you start to see a whole different. There's so many other things involved in Christian principles that I wasn't using. And of course, I got out of business about a year after I became a Christian and moved from Minnesota down to Texas so I could go to school, and then we went down on the border of Mexico for 8 years and did mission work there in Brownsville, and then we have been back in the Metroplex since '95, and so I've been on both sides and seen it in both ways.
Yes, Mike, wonderful. We are thankful to God that He brought you here to Dallas. Yeah, you've been a blessing here, and it's great to have you close by. Mike, some people might be thinking, well, the Bible is so old, and the business world changes so rapidly, and there are so many things happening around us. We live in a very modern world. How is it, or why is it that the Bible, being such an ancient book, has anything to tell us nowadays? Maybe some people are asking that question.
Yeah, that's a good question. People think sometimes the Bible was written 2,000 years ago, so obviously everything has changed in our world. The reality is, people wore sandals back then, and people wear Nikes today, and they rode camels, and we drive cars. I mean, but life is still life. Relationships with people, relationships with God, how we live life in every aspect, whether it be in the family, business, wherever it is. All those principles are eternal principles. As a for instance, when I do marriage counseling with couples, Paul talks about, the Apostle Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2 about have this attitude in yourselves, which is also in Christ Jesus. And just prior to that, he says, don't do things from selfishness or empty conceit, but consider one another as more important to yourself than yourself. And he's giving them teaching on how they can have unity in the church at Philippi. Well, those principles apply to how to have unity inside of a marriage. But you can also take those principles and you can put them into business. If an employer, for instance, is very arrogant and very dominating and controlling and selfish, that can have an effect on the employees. And the employees can get to where they don't care. All they work for is a paycheck because this guy's a jerk, and things like that. But if a Christian businessman treats his people with respect, as more important than himself, that he values them. A lot of big businesses today are employing biblical principles because they know it's effective. And they're doing it just because it improves their bottom line. But they realize by treating employees the way Jesus says to treat one another, their employees are more productive, they're happier, they don't job hop from one job to the next. They're more likely to be more loyal to the employer, because he's employing biblical principles about treating employees, respect, and being humble himself. And I've seen this happen in a lot of business. Even though I haven't been in business since 1982, I'm very familiar with the business world, and I'm also involved. I have Christian friends who are business people, and the ones that are the most successful, some of them might have a bigger bottom line sometimes and higher profit, but it's short-lived, or they're always having to put it up, fire employees or stealing from them, or just all kinds of incidents occur. But I have Christian friends who are business people who employ biblical principles in the marketplace, and makes a tremendous difference with their employees, and it also has a major impact with their customers. And can I elaborate on that a little bit, or you got another question?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, I think that's
for instance, when you're a businessman and you're all about the dollar, customers know that, so they're less likely to trust you. They gotta watch out, because maybe this guy's going to rip me off if I'm not careful. But if you are a Christian dealing in business and you're letting your yes be yes and your no be no, like the Bible teaches, and you're a man of your word or a woman of your word in business, what ends up happening is the customer realizes you're trustworthy, and you develop a relationship with them. And what can happen is when you get down the road a ways, even though a competitor might come in and have a lower bid, they would rather deal with you because they know they can trust you. They know that if you say you're going to have it done at such and such a time, they know that you're going to do everything you can to have it done on time. They know when your employees show up, your managers, or when they deal with your accountant on the phone, or deal with the guy who works in the shop, or the foreman, or whatever it is, it trickles down into the business where your employees treat your customers well also. And as a result, a competitor might come in and give a lower bid, but they don't want to deal with them. My son has a very successful business, And man, they don't want other bids a lot of times. They want to deal with Michael because of the way he treats his customers, and they know that they can trust him. There's some other things about that. Just integrity in the marketplace. If a customer is suspicious of that you're not very honest, that can make a big difference. There's a multimillionaire Christian man that I know, extremely successful, and he told me that he tells his salesmen, he has a number of salesmen, and they cover a large region of the country, and he said, I tell my salesmen and my saleswomen, I don't care if you promise somebody a paperclip. If you promise them a paperclip and you have to drive 60 miles to bring it to them, then I expect you to do that. And that's just a principle that he operates by, because he wants his customers to know their word at their business is reliable. So anyway, I have a lot more things to say about it. Maybe you have another question.
Maybe we need to have more on this particular question, because it's very interesting. You gave us some very precise examples on how a person guided and transformed by the Bible can make a significant difference in their business. I totally agree with you. I mean, I want to deal with somebody that I can trust, and I want to deal with somebody that is going to be fulfilling his promises, and especially I don't want anybody that just is looking at me for the dollar.
Yep.
That's pretty bad.
That's right. Another principle that is helpful in business is where, I've been preaching in Colossians for the past few months, and this last week dealt with social relationships, where Paul talks about, put away anger, wrath, malice, slander, abusive speech from the mouth. And then he says, put on the new self in verse 12, put on a heart of compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. I've known bosses, I've worked for people. I worked for a boss. He wore a big old cowboy hat, had big cowboy boots. He played college football, and he was just a big egotist.
Oh, my.
And he'd put his big old feet on the desk, and he'd be throwing 4-letter words at us and just intimidate and slam his hand on the desk because he was angry because we weren't doing everything he wanted done. That has a major, and people couldn't quit fast enough. They're always looking for another job and so on. And he was out of control. His anger, was out of control. The Bible talks a lot about rather than being angry, that you have a heart of compassion. The guy that replaced him actually bought his business, had just a lot of compassion, and just treated employees completely differently, in a different way. And he was so much more productive. He, in fact, had several businesses. This guy that sold out, that was really unfriendly and out of control anger and so on, he eventually he sold. That was the only business he had. He bought another one and ended up going bankrupt. The guy that bought his business had 2 or 3 different companies that he owned, and he was doing fine because he had people in place that he could trust and that worked hard for him. So biblically, sometimes bosses think I can win through intimidation. And so I'm just strong personality and dominating and angry, and boy, the employees better watch out. And the reality is that's not as effective as acting like a Christian. And so there's just things like that of, being hospitable, where you treat your employees in a kind way as far as spending time with them and being able to use wisdom to keep things professional when you're working, but that you have a friendship with them. I mean, those are all biblical principles for being effective in the workplace.
Wow, right. Excellent. I noticed from everything that you've said that we're talking about basically character here. We're not talking about techniques for making a productive business, but we're talking about the person, the individual, and the character of that individual.
Yeah, let me give you a couple anecdotes, illustrations. There was a Christian friend of mine who worked for, I guess they had 4,000 or 5,000 employees, a large company. He was a CPA, and they wanted things that were dishonest in the books, and it may not have come from way up on top, but his supervisor, whoever he was, some assistant vice president or whatever, whoever it was, put pressure on him, and he refused to do it. 1 year later, he was unemployed. They found a way to get rid of him, but it was not he couldn't come back and say it was due to this or that. He just, they waited some time before they did it, and kind of the old adage of a non-Christian is, I don't get mad, I just get even. And so this guy got even with him and got rid of him. He was without a job for a year. But here he did what was right, and he ended up suffering for it. And he nearly lost his house. He got to where he couldn't make his house payments. He couldn't find a job anywhere, and nearly lost his home. And they may have even had begun the threats of foreclosure and so on. And he found a job. He had a job offer in New Mexico. He went out and visited the employer. They offered him the job. Before he took the job, he visited around to the various churches that he might consider going to. And because the churches were not healthy for his family, he turned down the job.
Wow.
And waited on God. He ended up getting a job, in West Texas in a large hospital, and he's a big shot now, and everything has turned out fine. I stayed in his house. I spoke at their church several years ago, stayed in his house with his wife. The kids are grown, and everything has turned out. God found a way to bless him. He did what was right. And to me, biblically, it's like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If your listeners go read Daniel chapter 3, or they read Daniel chapter 6, where Daniel is thrown into the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel do the same thing. They refuse to bow and do what is wrong because it will spare them some issues. So they decide, we're going to do what's right. In chapter 3, they say, we don't need to give you an answer about this. If God delivers us, he delivers us. If he doesn't and we die, so be it. But we are not going to violate our relationship with God and do what is wrong to save our own skin. And so they get thrown into the furnace, and if you read Daniel 3 and if you read Daniel 6, when Daniel's thrown into the lion's den, God spares them, God delivers them. I believe God has a way of blessing people. I don't believe it. I know it. The Bible teaches it. I don't simply believe it. It is very biblical that God finds a way to bless people who do what's right, especially when it's hard. So in business, when a business person is tempted to cheat somehow in order to save his skin, that will always come back to haunt them. But if you do what is right, even if it costs money, and you just stand on those principles, God finds a way. It might not be monetarily. You still might lose the business, go through some difficult times, but as time goes on, you'll look back and you'll be blessed again, physically or financially, and you'll say, now I see how God was working. And just like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God finds a way to deliver. In the 1980s, a Christian man who's an elder in a church of Christ, that I know, he's a good friend of mine. He was in partnership with another guy, and they were doing land developing among other. He had other businesses as well. He owned some properties, and commercial and residential. He also had a small manufacturing firm, and his partner. The land. They bought a huge piece of land for a lot of money, and the deal. And they were faced with some serious financial difficulties. His partner bailed, dumped the whole thing on my friend. And my friend had the option to do the same thing, just go into bankruptcy, or, just it wasn't worth the effort, and just let the bill collectors come out, turn the land back over to him, and fight it out in court or whatever. But he decided to stick with it. He went through several years of very difficult financial circumstances. And you never saw a change in his personality because he's a Christian man. His faith in God is so strong that you didn't see a difference in him because he trusted God. He had some struggles, He didn't deal with everything perfectly, but he was a lot different than if you're not a Christian and you're trying to deal with life on your own. And so, kind of like David when he says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you're with me, in Psalm 23. And he knows, even it doesn't mean God's not ever going to let us have problems, but when we have problems, he'll be with us if we're faithful. So by the time he got into the 90s, his business started booming. And he has been extremely successful financially, now semi-retired, and just been tremendously blessed. But because of biblical principles, he was unwilling to compromise his faith. Any Christian can do what's right when it's easy. The question is, can a person do what's right when it's hard? And if you do what's right when it's hard, God will find a way to bless you. And he did that in those two examples I gave you, and I have others. But the point is, and there's one other very important thing I need to say. I guess we're probably getting close to running out of time. But a biblical principle, Philippians 4, 6, and 7. Don't be anxious about things, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Before I was a Christian and I was in business, I got to tell you, I had so much stress. I mean, I was in my middle 20s, and I was going to have a stroke the way I was going. I had so much anxiety because I felt like I was all alone. And I was on my own. This thing was going to sink or float based on Mike. And after becoming a Christian, dealing with life now, where I just say, I don't care if I starve to death. I'm not worrying about this anymore. I've had it. And the peace that you get when you turn things over to God, when you pray and you release those things to God and allow God to go to work, God grants you peace. So, I know business people all over the place who are so stressed out. They're not happy. They're making money, and the reason they started the business because they wanted to be happy. And if I make money, I'll be happy. But if you make money and you're all full of anxiety and angst and worry all the time, I don't care how much money you have, you're still miserable. So biblical principles dominating a person's life help in, just countless ways. Okay, you got anything else for me today?
Wow, wonderful, wonderful examples. I'm glad that you brought the examples of these two people that endured, and that means, Mike, that you have to be prepared when you're allowing the Bible to guide you and direct you. You have to be prepared to take your stand and to be firm in your beliefs, even though things might not turn out the way you anticipate, but in the long run, it's going to be much better for you.
Amen. That's
we
right.
do have a question on the chat line. Says everything is true, but where is the unity of the church? How come it is easier to apply
Christian principles
to business and not to cross-cultural relationships?
Yeah, that is an interesting question, and it relates to a question that I have also, Mike, because my question here is, do most Christians study the Bible in order to learn how to direct their secular lives? What do you think?
Well, I'm kind of not sure if I'm understanding both questions there, but let me see if I do.
Okay.
The question maybe like how that guy's question or person's question has to do with kind of the conflict between the church and culture, or the church and business. Is that kind of what he's asking?
Yeah, I think that I understand what he's asking here. And hello, Oscar. Thanks for being there, and all those people that are listening to this program. Thank you for being there with us. Your questions are welcomed. I think that what Oscar is saying, how is it that we think about this, and we know these wonderful principles, and we know how they are effective in the world, everything you do, but sometimes it's difficult within the churches because there are cross-cultural relationships that are difficult, like dealing with different races, like dealing with generation gaps.
I think, first of all, Christians are not perfect. They just follow Jesus, okay? So when you're dealing with humans, you're always going to have problems. I don't care where you are. I don't care if you're a Christian or a Buddhist or a Muslim or whatever you are. I don't care if you're an atheist. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you're in a school or if you're in a business, or if you're in the mall shopping. There's conflicts because humans are ignorant sometimes and don't act the way they're supposed to. And as far as the racial thing or cross-cultural thing, there's a terrible saying, which is the most racist time in America is on Sunday morning.
Wow.
And that's terrible. I can tell you at Walnut Hill, where I preach at Walnut Hill Church of Christ, on 10550 Marsh Lane. And just kidding. Anyway, we're multiracial. About half of our new people, we were basically an all-white church for the most part. In the last 10 years, we have become multiracial. Probably half of our new people, maybe more, 50 to 60% of our new people are non-whites. And so that, we're a very multiracial church. We have people from Ghana, Nigeria, Japan, Togo, Africa. Got a woman coming from another African country Wednesday. I can't remember the name of it. I couldn't find it on the map. We've had people from the Philippines and Albania. We have an Albanian guy here, a family here. We're multiracial. So I can't speak, my feeling is churches that are not cross-cultural and do not have other races in their churches, all I can say is they need to repent. I think it's terrible. I mean, we in school, there's blacks and whites and Hispanics and gringos and, and Asians and Caucasians all mixed together. And they're that way in the malls and, and in the marketplace. But you go to church, and a lot of churches are all blacks are over here and all whites are over there and the Hispanics are over here. I mean, it's wrong. I don't know, so whatever I can tell that guy that asked the question, I say, amen. I can only do my part. I can't be responsible for all the churches in the world and all the Christians in the world. I can only be responsible for Mike.
Yeah, Mike. And, we're going to have to set another interview to talk about cross-cultural relationships because that's a very important issue, and I think that there is a lot to learn about that. But, of course, we cannot devote our time here to talk more about cross-cultural relationships. The question that I asked has to do with, it seems to me sometimes that when we study the Bible, we do it most of the time in a church context. And we think of the Bible in terms of our Christian relationships and our traditions and is this right, is this wrong, and what's the true teaching, doctrine of the Bible. And sometimes we neglect seeing the application of the Bible to real life.
Sure.
Am I just
sure.
imagining that, or is it something that
I think that's been a fault of all different flavor churches. Doesn't matter what brand you're talking about, what denomination. And our movement has been guilty of that, where we're known, a church might be known for some of their doctrinal stances rather than the things that they're doing in the community to bless people. And so, again, you can be responsible only for your own congregation and for your own self. And I think that where the church you're at, the church where I'm at, we're not like that. We teach Bible, and yes, there are some doctrinal things in the Bible, but we don't take these doctrinal things and put them up here, and then all these other things, holiness and all these other things, and put them down here. The greatest commandment is, I got a cast on, you can see, is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, love your neighbors yourself. This is the greatest commandment. So sometimes churches and individuals in churches get things out of whack where they major on the minors. That's one of the things Jesus, nobody got greater condemnation and judgment pronounced on them than the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 23. And they were the ones, Jesus said, you tithe, mint, dill, and cumin, but you neglect the weightier matters of the law. Justice and mercy and faithfulness. These things should have done them without neglecting the others. So Jesus wants us to do, things right, search the Bible and do things, have the right doctrine and study the best we can to know how we are to work out our church life, worship, etc. But there are other things that are actually more important, which is love God, living a holy life. How do you treat your wife? How do you treat your kids? How do you treat people in the marketplace like we've been talking about? Those things are critical. And so, you and I have to be responsible for ourselves. Our listeners need to be responsible for themselves. And if they call themselves a Christian, then they need to show it by the way they treat other people. This Sunday, I'm preaching in Colossians 3, and one of the things I'm going to be talking about is Christian love, where Jesus says, you let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. How people know we're Christians, the only place you see that is in John 13, when Jesus says, by this all men will know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another. Exactly. And so when Christians love each other, treat each other the way they're supposed to, people who are not Christians see that, and it's an attraction to them. So I would agree wholeheartedly with the idea of getting priorities in perspective,
in the right
and
place. Having
a priority list rather than majoring on things. And really, frankly, for instance, taking the Lord's Supper. Anybody can take the Lord. How hard is it to eat a piece of unleavened bread and drink some grape juice? What's harder is to treat that person you pass the tray to treat them right.
To treat them with love.
So, that's where, but, when your priorities are straight, then that changes behavior. And
yes.
So that's what we need to do. And the same is true in the marketplace, how you treat customers, and as far as evangelism or, there's a lady that I'm working with who is a drug addict who is now clean and sober, doing great. Mm-hmm. And at work, where she works during break time, she goes and reads her Bible. And that has had an impact on other employees. They've come to her and they told her, she told me yesterday, it just really touched her heart, because they said, you are an inspiration to me, because they see where her life was and they see where she is now, and they see that it's God and His Word that has helped make the changes. And that's the Christian in the marketplace. You don't rub it, rub their face in it and get in their face about it. A lot of times it's acting like a Christian, doing it humbly, not like standing on the street corner showing off that they're reading their Bible. She was doing it quietly in a corner in the break room.
She's touching lives. She's touching lives. And that's what it's all about. Mike, I hope that you can come back and have another interview with us. I'm thinking about 3 things that we can cover. We need to cover your trip to Cambodia, and you need to come and tell us how it went and the things that you learned there and the things that you want to share with us when you come back from Cambodia.
Well,
we need to talk
about, because I am pretty fiery about, passionate about Cambodia.
Yeah, we need to talk about prayer, because we didn't have a chance. You touched it, but we didn't have a chance to go a little bit deeper in that, and I think that that's important. You talked about the peace and the serenity that trusting God can bring, and that I think is essential in the business world. And another thing is that we need to go into some practical guidance as to how can people study the Bible and see the principles and see the light and see how these things apply and can make you happy and successful and a good person. So I really appreciate, Mike, your time with us. And I hope that you can come back very soon when you come to Cambodia, and we can do that again. How about that?
Amen. I appreciate very much the opportunity to share. And I look forward to sharing all 3 of those topics that you brought up, and maybe sometime in late August or September I can talk about Cambodia while it's fresh on my mind after I get back. So you and I can kind of email, and you can let me know. All
right, Mike. Thank you very much. Thank you, Art, for your great help.
Mike, thank you so much for being part of DFW Business Hour, and I hope it's not the last time. And we look forward to seeing you again on Skype and hearing what you have to tell us.
We have several questions on the chat that we have to cover later, Mike. So I'm gonna save them here so we can discuss them later.
Amen. All right. Well, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you another day.
Thanks. God bless.
Bye. Bye.
This is your spiritual connection, ourplanetlife.org, broadcasting from Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas.